Hi everyone, my name's Sean. I lead our expert services team here at Amplience. I've been here for around 10 years and our predominant role is to support customers onboarding onto the platform. I'll be talking quite a bit today around Amplience Workforce and how we support customers onboarding onto this part of the Amplience product. So I'm going to kick off this session today. I was looking at our release docs earlier and Workforce was released 2 years ago. Its birthday is tomorrow. So I'm going to start today's session with a little bit of information around where we started with Amplience Workforce, some releases we've had in between, and then focus more around Amplience Workflows. So I'll be basing the session today around a particular use case, which is product attribution and product description generation. So I'll be providing a demo of a typical workflow for that use case. And then I'll move on to talk through 4 of the key phases of a project implementation. So I'll discuss discovery, flow build, prompting and testing, go live and ownership. But I'm not going to be going through a task list. It's going to be more focused around the things that we've learned and things that you can take into your own projects, whether they're workforce related or hopefully even more kind of specific AI projects you might be working on internally within your businesses. I'll probably be around 25 to 30 minutes. If you came for Mohit and Jane, maybe take a break and come back then. But I'm going to kick off first with an introduction to Amplience Workforce. Okay, so when we first released Workforce 2 years ago, we released it with a set of predefined, ready-to-use templates. And they covered key content use cases like a product description, product blog, alt text, and many others. And they're generally used for kind of one-off generation use cases. So the kind of limitation that we were hearing from customers at the time around these templates was that they really wanted to input specific values to the AI model and prompt the AI model to get the outputs they wanted from the AI LLM. So that's why we then went on to release what we call custom templates. And custom templates allows you to do exactly that. You can set a set of information that you can provide the AI model, such as maybe product imagery, some key attributes that you might have. And then you can also add in specific prompts that you want the LLM to listen to, and you want to instruct the LLM to then listen to, and then provide an output which is closer to, say, the brand guidelines that you might have for writing, say, product copy. As I said, they were typically used for single one-off generation use cases. However, we do have management APIs where some customers have adopted to generate these at scale. But when we were in conversations with customers about these types of use cases, there are other parts of that process which Amplience Workforce, as it was at the time, wasn't able to support. So there might be parts of that generation process which require some research into that particular topic or product. There might be a set of review steps in that process that need to be followed. There might be some translation that's also required as part of the process. And so this is why we developed Amplience Workforce Flows, to allow customers to chain together a set of multi-stage content generation processes to help automate that end-to-end process. So I'm going to move into a demonstration of Amplience Workforce, but before I do so, I'm just going to center around the product description use case and some of the problems customers might have before use of Amplience Workforce, and then some of the benefits that they get at the end. Many customers are on different journeys with AI, so I believe most customers we speak to are really using AI for kind of one-off generation. But with product descriptions, there can be periods of the year where you get a higher influx of new products. And so trying to manage the influx of those new products can be quite difficult. You need to add more people to the team potentially to handle that. And product copy can be kind of one of the main blocking points for getting a product live. Sometimes that can be something that's holding up, pushing that product live to the website and other applications. So it can be quite difficult to scale it out without adding more people. And then the other aspect we hear is around inconsistency around the quality of the copy or tone used in the copy. If you think about adoption of AI to help with this process, and specifically Workforce, at the end of this, you should be able to generate product copy which meets your brand guidelines, you can reduce the amount of manual effort the teams are having to do, because you can take away things like research steps they might have to undertake and ask the AI to do that type of work on their behalf. So they move more to a review step, an editing step, which is still really important because you can't really trust the AI at this stage to push that content live. You still absolutely need that review process in there. So that part becomes all the more important. But what it does help with is getting your products live sooner, so you can get the products live as quickly as possible. So I'm going to move into a demo now, and I'll also just orientate you a little bit around Workforce. So for those of you with access to Amplience, when you log in, if you have this entitlement, you'll be able to access Workforce here. And then the first thing that you'll see are those predefined templates that I spoke to earlier, the one-off content generation pieces. I also wanted to show you that we have an area here for management of AI models. So we provide a number of AI models for you to pick and choose from. Some models are better at doing certain things than others. So some might be better for more image generation type use cases, whereas other AI models might be better, more focused around content generation use cases. Some models will use more credits than others. So you've got the flexibility to choose maybe a cheaper model for some simpler tasks. And then where you've got more complex tasks, you might choose a fuller, more complete model. So we manage this on your behalf. We test the models before we then put them into Workforce to enable them for you to use. And you've got flexibility to choose the model for the job at hand. The other area I wanted to orientate you to is this custom templates area here. So this is where you wanted to specifically give the AI some specific data and prompt it with some specific information so it generates the output you're expecting. So this is where you can define a custom template, in this case for a product description. Here you can say, right, the inputs I'm going to give it are some product attributes, some product images, and maybe some additional data that I might have on the products. And then in instruct is where you give it the instruction of how you want it to create the content at the end. So I'm going to come back to custom templates a little bit later, but I'm going to move now into flows, which is the main topic of conversation today. So within flows, I have what you're seeing here are a number of demonstration flows that we have in this particular environment. For those of you familiar with our CMS, we also have a similar concept within Workforce around hubs. So you can have a hub for things like your development and testing of your flows. You can then maybe have another area for testing, and then maybe another one for production. You might also choose to separate out your hubs by use case. So some people who are responsible more for product copy might have their own hub for it and with a flow enabled for that. And then if you have another team that are responsible for maybe image standardization, which is another flow and use case that we've been working on, you might choose to have a different set of users with access to that hub. So there's quite a bit of flexibility there around that. The next step I'm going to go into is to actually edit a pre-existing flow that I've created and just walk you through that. So I'm in the flow designer or the canvas here. And as you can see on the left-hand side, I've got a set of actions on the left-hand side. And I can use these actions to build out my flow here on the canvas. So I can just drag and drop them from here into here. This particular flow runs off of what we call a form trigger. So if I just go to the test mode here, if I was to input this information manually, I can put in things like the brand, the product name, maybe a set of product images, and an item number. So I'm just going to go to view runs here, and I'm going to show you one that was run earlier. And just for the interest of time, assume I've put in some information here around the brand. I put in the product name. I've given some imagery and an item number. I'm just going to rerun this flow. So while that's happening in the background, I'm just going to go back to the edit flow canvas here and just explain what's happening. So in a real world automation, you wouldn't start a flow with a form trigger. we have what we call a webhook trigger here, which would normally be the starting point for the flow. That's where you can provide it a payload of information. So it might be the product imagery, some product attributes, and maybe some other data, which then is the trigger point for the flow. So that can all be triggered automatically from maybe a PIM or another service that you have between PIM and Amplience Workforce to trigger the flow to start. You'll then see I've got what we call a decision agent here. And the decision agent is looking at the information that I provided, such as brand, the product name, and product images. It's using that information to determine whether this product belongs to the fashion products category or to tech and electrical appliances. And you can now see I'm able to branch off this decision agent here. And the benefit of this is that I might have different logic, different brand guidelines, different copy requirements between fashion versus tech products. So the ability to branch off now means I can then set up some specific things for each different category as required. So if I just follow along the fashion product branch here, the next agent that we have here is what we call a research agent. So we have some agents already pre-built for certain use cases. So we have one that can translate content. We've got, as you can see here, I've already made use and spoken about the decision agent. And we've got this research agent. So this research agent can be used where you might want to go away and research other websites for this specific product that you need to write this product copy for. And on the right-hand side here, you can give it instruction. So you might say you only want to research the specific manufacturer for this brand, for this product. You can also say, I only want to search these websites, but you can also allow a do not allow list as well. So you can give all that information to the research agent. It will go away, look across a number of different websites and bring back some information on that product. That information then feeds this next step here, which is a fashion attribution agent. And you can see on the left here, I don't actually have a fashion attribution agent, but what I do have is this custom agent here. And you can use this agent for more specific use cases, where like in this case here, we don't have a defined agent for attribution generation, but we're able to use this custom agent to meet this particular use case and requirement that I have to generate some attributes for this product. So if I just look at this fashion attribution agent here, one of the key benefits, I can give it a prompt and some information around what I want it to do. But I can also, which is quite important for attributes, is give it a definition of how I want that data to look when it's generated all the attributes and it's done that research to find that information, how I want the data to look at the end, because then I can feed that through to the PIM system at the end in the structure that it needs. The next step of the flow is I'm now passing the results of the attribution that's been done here to this fashion product description agent. And this is one of the content generation templates. So the custom templates, which I showed you a short while ago, this is where this comes into play now. So it's using that prompt I've given it for how to generate copy for fashion products that we sell. And it will now generate my product description according to the rules that I've set out. The other two actions here, slightly more technical, this one, it's just converting the attributes here that I've generated into a JSON string so I can pass that to the third-party system I need to at the end. This set custom attributes action, it has reference to the review UI, which again, I'm going to come back to and speak about that a little bit more detail in a few moments. And then we have the human review step here. So I can configure how I want my review interface to look. So I can define which fields the user should see within the review UI. And as you can see here, I've also defined a reviewer. So I might, for example, have for fashion products, Ben in my team might be the person responsible for reviewing any product descriptions that are generated for the fashion category. Whereas for tech products in the human review step, you can see I'm the reviewer for those products. And that's kind of one of the benefits of branching out into separate branches for where you might need to have additional logic like that. In this particular case, specific assignment of reviews based off category. The thing that I haven't really touched upon is like at the end of the review stage, I might then want to pass that information to a third party system. So just to quickly show you the process of adding an action, I can just drag and drop them into the flow here. And let's say on approval, this next step will make a call to post the data to a specific API. So I might have an API with service which I want the workforce flow to call with the data attributes and the review that's been generated. And this is where the actual business user would go. So that flow canvas I was just showing you, a business user wouldn't go in there. Their really focus is going to be more on this area within the platform, which is where my reviews go. And so in here, I can review any flows of a particular type. So this is where there might be a benefit to separate your hubs by your use case, because then the flows will only show the generations that you've generated will only show for that specific flow use case. So I can filter my view here to see what flows I have pending. You can see that these flows are assigned to me. And as a user, I can go in and review the product description that's been generated. I can make specific amendments in this box here and approve it. And then that would then follow the next action, which was to send that payload to the third-party system that should receive this information. That's kind of a very top-level overview of flows and the types of actions you might have for product description generation. There are a lot more things you could add to that flow based off requirements, but I'm going to touch upon some of those things as I move on to the next section. So I'm now going to go through the different stages of a workforce project, starting with discovery, and just kind of talk through the important things that we've learned through each stage. So early on in discovery, when we show customers workforce and workforce flows, there can be quite a lot of excitement to automate everything, which is great. But then what happens is you don't really have a specific focus on one particular use case. So what we often recommend, like if there's like 5 or 6 different use cases that you've identified you want to automate, score them based off the return on investment automating that process might have, or maybe even score it based off the efficiency that's going to bring to the team. So once you've done that, you can then move into define the scope. And what I'd suggest is starting narrow. So like in the case of product descriptions, you could just start with one category first and build out the flow end to end for that one category. That then helps you kind of prove out if the journey and the flow works end to end for that category. And then you can start to scale it across other ones. If you start trying to build it for all categories all at once, and you need to make different changes based on learnings and testing that you do, you then have to update it in multiple places within the flow. So just recommend building it out end to end, get it right for that category, and then move on to the others. The third aspect is really making sure, especially when it comes to things like copy generation, is making sure you understand things like your rules, where there's variability in things like product descriptions. Maybe for certain brands that you write your product descriptions for, you have to write about those in a very specific way. And having examples of what good looks like really helps reduce the amount of iteration and rework needed within prompting later on down the line. So really spending time to think about this at the start in discovery really helps the project run quickly later on. The other piece that we always do for these projects is to map out the as-is process. The kind of benefit of doing this is that you can start to identify where there might be steps in the existing process that we could look to automate. So a business user today might be going away to research that product across multiple different websites as part of the product generation piece today. Well, as I showed you in the workflow a short moment ago, you could use a research agent to do that part. So it's really at this stage, making sure you understand all the touch points in the process and identifying where you could potentially help with automations, as well as understanding things like where are the review steps in the process, because you can also stage multiple review steps within the workflow too. After you've mapped out the as-is, map out, before you even get into the flow build, what that flow might look like. So we often use Miro just to map out that flow end to end. And as you can see in here, what we've been able to do through this side, right, we're going to use AI to generate some of the attributes for this product. We can use a research agent to go away and do some research on it. So really, at this point, the only manual steps that are needed are within this review and amendment stage. Everything up to it can be automated, but you can't really start to design what the to-be process and that flow looks like unless you understand what the as-is process looks like. But when it comes to copy rules, what's really helpful getting ready early on in discovery is these types of things. So understanding, like, for product descriptions, what are the different sections of the product description that I need to include? For my product title, does it need to be in a specific format? Do I include certain elements of the product in that product title in a certain order? Is there a certain word count for each section of the product description? What type of information should I always include in my descriptions versus what should I never allow? And then also, what are the variations across category? Having all of that information up front really does help when it comes to building the prompt. And as I said earlier, it kind of reduces the amount of iteration you need to do during the prompting stage later on. The other kind of key piece I'd recommend in discovery is locking down the input payload and the output, because knowing what data you're going to get at the start of the process and what the data shape needs to look like at the end means you don't have to make as many assumptions when it comes to building out the flow. So that's something I would suggest trying to get really early on before you start building the flow, is so that you know the data structure that you're getting in, and then you can make decisions in the flow build throughout that process. So there are some of the key things around discovery. When it comes to the build itself, there are kind of 5 key stages. You could maybe argue not all flows might need the review stage. So in the use case like image alt text, for example, maybe you could remove that stage. But for product copy and in general, that we definitely see 5 steps in the process, and understanding these 5 steps will really help you understand how to approach the build. So the first step really is loading the information. It's getting all the data that you have about that product, the imagery, and maybe some other data that you might have about the product. You then might need to transform that data. So that data you get from PIM, there might be some data in there that you might want to strip out, because if you include it as part of the AI generation step, the AI might read that information and make some bad decisions around how to write the product copy. So you might need to have some transformation steps in your flow to reshape it. So you give the right information to the AI step, but also so when it comes to the end and you need to generate the output for whichever service is consuming the data from us, it will be in the right shape and format that you're expecting. Once you've loaded, you transform the data, you can then pass it to the AI model to then generate, in this case, the product copy and attributes, and then pass that off to the review stage, where it then gets reviewed, amendments are made, and then approved. And then that will then trigger the output payload to the third-party system. So they're generally the 5 steps to consider when building out your flows. And then some other kind of interesting things that we've learned. We do have specific CMS use cases for flows. For example, the ability to translate content or to generate content from a brief. But the CMS can also play another role in some of these flow builds that we've been working on. So what we see is that customers might have structured information, lists of information stored in spreadsheets, and that information might have an influence on the copy that's generated. As an example, there might be certain substitution of words, words that you never want to be used in product copy, and if it's identified, you might want to substitute them with a different word. Or there might be certain terms which are banned, which should never appear in them. Or maybe like there are very specific attributes for products which are the only ones that should be allowed to be used for that particular product. All of that information might be managed in lists today inside a spreadsheet, but the CMS is also great at structuring and storing structured data. So what we're doing in some of our projects is to create that type of data which can be maintained by business users, and make a call out to that information as part of that loading step I was just talking about, and then pass that to the AI as part of the information it gets around how to generate the description for the content. One of the main benefits of AI is like it helps you generate content faster, but the problem that brings is that it means there's a bottleneck further down the process now when it comes to the review side of things. And so we've spent quite a bit of time as a product team investing in the reviews process for customers so that it can be as efficient as possible for teams to get through all the reviews. So that set custom attributes action, which I mentioned earlier, I said I'd get back to. That's where you can say, right, there are certain things that I receive in the data payload that I want users to be able to filter the review UI by. So it might be the primary category or the sub-brand that I want users to be able to filter on so that they can focus their work for that day. So that's one area we've made enhancements on, and we'll continue to add further things to in the coming weeks for the review list. Coming very soon is some improvements to the review generation UI. So for those of you familiar with our CMS, we've spent quite a bit of time over the past 2 years improving the content form so that you can configure that in a way to make it as efficient as possible for business users. And we bring that same functionality to the review UI so that when you have your review UI screen, you can organize the content that the reviewer should be looking at, such as the product imagery, the description, the metadata, all in one place. And you can organize it based off importance. They can get to the data that they need to update quicker. So that's something we're looking to release in the next week to 2 weeks. The next kind of section is more focused around prompting and testing and some of the learnings that we've had around this. So when it comes to prompting, we always start our prompts by giving the AI model a role. So we generally say you're a product description copywriter whose task is to generate product descriptions, and we want you to write in a specific style, and we want you to write the copy and output it in a particular format. So this is an example template I was showing earlier, and you can see how we've structured it. So we've given the AI, you're a product description copywriter. Your role is to write fashion product descriptions. We've given it some style instructions here. So write clear, consumer-friendly, and concise sentences. And then also provided it some information on how to structure the product description at the end. So that's how we always tend to structure the prompts for kind of content generation type use cases. The other kind of key thing to take into account is the prompt itself and the amount of information that you put in there. We've seen like lots lengthy brand guidelines, like documents that customers write about how they should write about their product descriptions. And it can be tempting to put all of that information into the prompt. While AI models have got better at reading larger documents over the past year, still giving it too much information can lead to kind of diluting some of the more important aspects you want it to do. So we generally recommend you start with like a minimum instruction needed, test that against say 20 to 50 products. And then if you notice, 49 out of 50 times for that one product, it didn't do this one thing, don't add a prompt to work around that particular issue because you're never going to get it 100% right. Let's say on the flip side, 49 out of those 50 products, the model every time didn't do this one thing. That's a good reason to add another prompt to the list. So what we recommend is like getting the prompt ready, test it against a set of products. You might get it to a 90% level of quality, and then there'll be some difficult products that you need to write for, which then is the last 10% that you then start to add additional prompts for to work around those particular difficult products. The third point is around the controlled list, which I was just talking about a moment ago. There is an argument to say you could add those controlled lists to your prompt. However, Every time you might want to add an addition to that list of banned terms or an attribute, it means you've got to update your workflow. And maybe then you need to create a new version of the flow. That's why those types of information, it doesn't make sense to include in your prompt. Those managed lists really should exist somewhere else. And then you have a step in the flow to call that information to retrieve it. And that type of information can continue to be managed by the business team as well. Moving on to testing now, there are kind of three different types of testing. So there's the flow test and more functional testing. So that's, does the flow run end to end without errors and across the different branches that you might have within your flow? Is it passing data correctly between each action? Can it handle the volumes that I'm expecting? So that all of that type of testing would be handled by the build team. You then have your output quality testing, which is like, is the AI generating the copy following the rules and the guidelines that I've given it? Does it read how I want my customers to read my product descriptions? And that type of testing we'd recommend is done by your in this case, product copy experts. They know how copy should be written for your product descriptions. And then the third type of testing is the adversarial type testing. So that is where you've got products which might be missing data when it's sent through from PIM. There might be products that sit across multiple categories, or they might be products for a very specific for a brand that where you have to write in a very specific way for. So that's like the last stage of the testing after output quality is trying to get the outputs right for those very specific, difficult to write for products. The last stage I'll talk through before I hand over to Muhit and Jane is the go live and ownership side, but it's not really something you should think about at the end. It's something that should be thought about right at the start. So thinking about ownership of the flows and the different steps in there is important to think about really at the beginning. So who will own updates to the prompts? That might not necessarily be a developer. It might be the product copywriter because they know what instruction they need to give it to generate the right outputs. You've then got the controlled list that might influence the product copy. So again, that's probably going to be another business user responsible for managing that type of information separately. And then there might be stages where you might want to upgrade the workflow to another AI model, or maybe one AI model is going to be deprecated and you need to update the flows to a later version. So you'll need someone who's going to be responsible for running test batches through the flow when you're changing your model to make sure that the outputs that you're getting still reflect against your expectations. The next part is around planning for volume. So this is where you'd work directly with the Amplience team, help us understand, what are the expected loads you'll have on a daily, weekly basis. Where might you have peak loads throughout the year where you might be sending more products through the system, just so we can make sure that the flow is set up in such a way to handle those loads as needed throughout the year. And then for some use cases, there might be a backfill approach needed. So for image alt text, there might be some imagery that you've already ingested into Amplience, as an example, and need to backfill alt text for those assets. So just working through the process and an approach for that is something else to consider way before go live. And the third aspect is building for that independence after. So Amplience services team, we've been very hands-on in these workflow builds over the past few months. It's not really an approach we take for other parts of our products, such as Content Hub and Dynamic Media and the CMS. We normally consult and train customers and our partners on the build. And that is definitely the approach we plan to take with Workforce in the future. But with us having this hands-on experience with these flow builds early on means we'll be able to help train you on how to do these things yourselves going forward. So what our intention is to ensure that going forward, you're live with Amplience, Workforce, and flows. You know how to adjust the flows. You know how to adjust the prompts, and having those decisions in the flows documented. For example, why I chose a particular AI model for a very specific task, or why I chose to put in some branching logic in this particular stage of the flow, is really important to document to help the teams take on and manage the flow on an ongoing basis. So with that, I will hand over to Muhit and Jane, who are going to talk about Primark's journey with Amplience Workforce.